Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Truglia, and today I hope this really will be the definitive response to the Ubi versus voice of reason debate. And the idea is not to get the fanboys, but to help the people that are really trying to discern matters, and for everyone else, even if they are a fanboy, to give some interesting observations about the style of debates, what we should have in Christian debating. And so let's get going. Now, I want to give an apology first before I start. Just a few words to voice of reason. And, it's a weird way to interact with someone for the first time. I don't know if he even knows who I am because I'm not nearly as big as he is. And so, to be perfectly frank, I haven't followed his stuff. Not for any particular good or bad reason, just haven't followed it. And so, I'm just giving honest first impressions of what I saw, nothing personally against him or anything like that. So this is really just a honest critique of what I saw. And to be perfectly frank, I was honestly surprised at the quality of what I saw. And so if it sounds like like beating down on him or anything like that, that is honestly not my intent. I have no history with Voice of Reason. He has no history with me. And I'm not looking to have a history or something like that. This is not my job where I need to build up controversy and try to angle for a debate. I'm not interested in that. But I am honestly surprised at the quality of his defense, to be perfectly frank. Now, I just want to say I got no axe to grind, so I'm open for a private discussion, a public discussion. Anything to prove that this is in good faith, I suppose, is my point. Or you could just say, yeah, I think you're in good faith, and fine, right? The point is, I'm not trying to run or hide. I'm not trying to escalate things or anything like that. This whole review will be in good faith because I really have nothing personal here. But again, to be very frank and honest, I just think Voice of Reason debated poorly, and I'm not sure how to say it more nicely. And I like that. You are a good person. Your arguments are bad. LOL. There you go. And so, and that could very well be the case. I'm not aware of Voice of Reason being like a big controversy person, and that's probably a good thing. And so it's all in good faith here. But again, not a fan of the debate. But let me give a summary. Voice of Reason relied on arguments which a cursory research would have debunked, and he employed rhetoric and interruption, right? So he gave very bad, very surface level arguments, which are especially poor and low quality, not really top tier arguments. And really his whole debate tactic was through empty rhetoric and through interrupting Ubie. And so in my view, he lost the debate in its substance and honestly just had a poor debate performance. As someone who, again, hasn't watched Voice of Reason, this comment says, I stopped watching after that really terrible opener by Voice of Reason. And I have to say, honestly, it was hard to continue watching after that, to be perfectly honest. But I wanted to do this because I saw how much traction it was getting and really cut to the chase for people and give them something that would be useful. And so I just want people to know this is a response video, not a comprehensive historical analysis on every topic that will be covered today. I book recommendations here for the Roman Catholic side, Keys Over the Christian World by Scott Butler and John Colarafi, and my own book from the Orthodox side, The Rise and the Fall of the Papacy, if you want nitty gritty on every little thing. Otherwise, we'll just do a pretty good coverage of everything we have here today that's relevant. For those who maybe want some more in a video, I do recommend Vigilius and Historical Ecclesiology by My Response, Most Holy Family Monastery, just because you would get a little more details on video if you are not a reading person. That being said, we have this. The chat was the most toxic of any debate I've watched, and that's very concerning. We're Christians, and we should not be having toxic discourse. And we have Voice of Reason is the future of Catholic apologetics. Soon, most of them will be like him. Classical debaters will disappear, which is interesting. And I do concur with this. Many arguments from emotion rather than reason. And again, it's maybe that's not most of his apologetics, but it did seem to be um, a large part of the actual debate performance. Now, that being said, if this video has blessed you, like, share, subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe right now. Don't forget to like right now. Maybe you want to wait till you see if you like it before you share it, right? Now, I do these videos to help support the Church of Cambodia. You could do so by help support the missionary work there at orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. The links are below. PayPal's preferred, but we also have Venmo. And for monthly contributors to Cambodian mission, there is a Patreon. So please bless the Church of Cambodia by supporting that church through those different means that you could donate, but also consider becoming a missionary. Right? Become a missionary. We'll pay you. Become a missionary to the Church of Cambodia. Pray for the missionary work in Cambodia. This is why I do this. Makes these shows I do possible. It's very much appreciated by me. Now let's get started. Let's talk about the opening statements. And I don't really have too many comments about Ubie's. It was a pretty much like, like a college professor giving you the history of ecclesiology in 10 minutes. How punchy could you make that? Ubie's essentially was decent opening statement. I only say decent, not because there was anything wrong with it or anything, but it was the wrong opening statement for the debate because he didn't know it would all be about rhetoric. He was going with facts. And so it was good. And it was also probably not what people were looking for. And that's tough because I, as a debater, run into the same thing where you want to give all the facts. I'm like, Ubie, I'm going to give all the facts, but that's not what some people are looking for. And so, again, it was a good opening statement, but nothing stupendous or, that would really blow people's minds other than perhaps facts they didn't know. Now, Voice of Reason's opening statement was littered with multiple pop apologetics. I mean, stuff I expect in drive-by Facebook comments back in the day. I was very surprised by that. And such arguments in which serious theologians and academics just wouldn't take seriously. They would actually, someone were to ask these questions, they would consider it pretty like freshman 100 level stuff. It was pretty surprising. And the whole opening had nothing to do with the debate topic, really. It was just a laundry list of stuff I don't like, to put in quotation marks. Like, here's a bunch of stuff I don't like. It can't be the church. And honestly, it was very bizarre to me, but that's how it came across. And so that being said, let's get into some nitty gritty. He spoke about how the Eastern Orthodox have unsettled biblical canon, and this came up several times during the debate. And we have this here. Craig Truglia has spoken. The case is closed. I'm pretty sure Augustine said that. Legit. And I think, let's see, St. Augustine. There you go. I think Craig should have been debating. Maybe I'll do one of these debates one day. But again, I don't need to. It's fine if Ubie does them. I'm not looking to really become a in-person debater, but just so people are aware, I've made the offer several times over the years to have an in-person debate, Most Holy Family Monastery. I'll drive to them. I'm not that far away from them. And if people want to meet me in Syracuse, we could do an in-person debate. And so that's out there because I actually think it's interesting to look the person right in the eyes and really have that debate. So that may happen, but again, this is not my job. So I'm not going to try to build up a whole image so I could do these debates. Not saying that's what Ubie's doing, but that's what a lot of these Roman Catholic channels are. They're just so big. And I do this to support a ministry and I work full time. So there you go. We said, I do know Ubie's somewhat inexperienced in-person debate, and he'll get more experienced. Myself, I actually have, I've done prosecution in a court of law. I won't get to all the details of my job, but the point is I have in-person debate, with legal stuff on the line. And so that's why I find that interesting, because I think a lot of people would find me in person even more difficult to debate, let alone the fact that they already ignore my videos and book and all this stuff. But anyway, it's not about me. Let's talk about the Eastern Orthodox biblical canon. It really is an inane argument. And I'm trying to find words that are truthful, but also not stoking the passions. And forgive me where I missed that mark. It's just not a good argument. because the church lacked local synodical canons until the 4th century. So if this is a system defeater, then the church was done the first few centuries when they didn't have a canon. So it's like, why is this even coming up? It's just, you can't take this argument serious because it refutes itself. It refutes the person presenting it. It's, like I said, it's bizarre that this would be a serious argument put forward. Now, as a matter of history, Truglia accepted multiple traditions, and canon law is like this, where it will give differing practices with baptism, differing practices with a whole litany of issues. And this gives the bishop, like a doctor, different medicines he could apply. Now, this is strange with Roman Catholics because after 1917, they totally revamped the whole canon law, right? So like they have a whole new canon law since 1917. But for those of us who have a canon law that's much older than that, we kind of follow the Trulian canon, and we suppose that the bishop's like a doctor that could use the canons as they need to. This video is not about canon law. There's, of course, canonical abuses, but the point is having multiple biblical canons is not strange any more than having the litany of different practices we have with the canon. Now, with the canon and other obvious Christian practices. Now, Roman Catholicism's first church-wide biblical canon is in the 16th century, and Eastern Orthodoxy is in the 17th century. So, again, this argument would have eviscerated both of us for centuries, and the Eastern Orthodox only lost by 1 century, I suppose. And as I said, it can't be a system defeater. But let me point out something that I don't think was brought up during the debate, which is both sides seem unaware of the rudder and the types of inspiration, right? If you have different canons, this kind of points to that the canon has qualitative differences, right? Some books of the Bible have a certain quality that other books of the Bible don't share. And I do think Ubie brought this up, maybe not with the sort of precision that we find in the footnote, the Apostolic Canon 85 in the rudder, which I'll just bring up very briefly, which is there's scriptures that are breathed out by God, literally word for word, thus saith the Lord, like literally says, thus saith the Lord, and then God speaks. And so, yes, that's a particular kind of revelation. Then there's scriptures that are superintended by God. It's written by man's agency, but what comes out is true the way God wanted it. For example, 2 Maccabees, the author gives an apology in the end for, what he might have got wrong or maybe could have put things better. Clearly, God would not give an apology. I know that's a Protestant apologetic, but this observation pre-exists Protestant apologetics. It does point to the fact that this is a book that God allowed to be written through human agency, despite it being edifying to the church. So it's superintended by the Spirit, but it's not revealed word for word from the Holy Spirit. And we have similar things that are somewhere in the middle, like in 1 Corinthians 7, where St. Paul says, I got a teaching from the Lord. And then thus saith me not the Lord, but I believe I also have the Holy Spirit. So, right, St. Paul saying, I believe I'm writing this by spiritual inspiration, but this is not word for word from God himself. I'm writing this. So we see this in the scriptures. And so what if, right, the rudder says yes, but I'm just going to just pose this because people never maybe heard this. What if the books of the scripture, like a lot of the deuterocanonical books, are qualitatively different than other books? Might that lead to certain people having one view of canon, because these are all the inspired books word for word from God, and other people having a modified view of canon? But these books are also from God because they're superintended by God, right? And so there's a qualitative difference, even if the end result is an edifying book that's required to submit your conscience to, right? So that's something that didn't come up, and it's a centuries old observation that's been made, which explains why there are different canons. And so if you didn't know, now you know. So there you go. Both sides unaware of the rudder, though I do think Ubie did try getting into it, but just not with the precision of the footnote, the Apostolic Canon 85 in the rudder. Now, more unsettling points, it's kind of some random ones. Like, for example, Voice of Reason said, well, the Eastern Orthodox have Universalists. They have universalist bishops. And again, it's like, look, you have a bad bishop, therefore Eastern Orthodoxy can't be the church. It's just an awful argument because Roman Catholics have universal bishops. And this is why, again and again, Ubie tried pointing out that, you know, your argument fails by your own standard. We're testing your standards. And we'll get a little more into that in a second. But it's an odd argument because there are Universalist Roman Catholic bishops. You know, we might get into it a little later, but like Bishop Barron is a hopeful Universalist, right? He's a Roman Catholic bishop. So it's if it could refute yourself, then it shouldn't be used as an argument to refute someone else. I think that's a basic debate rules of debate that we should all agree with. And what I see is when Ubie's trying to point out the standard doesn't work, then he does his Voice of Reason does his impression of that guy from Batman, and he's like, "But we're not here to debate Catholicism. You know, when I say so and put my hands in the air and smirk, you know, it's bizarre, right? He's literally saying this argument makes no sense because it's self-refuting for you. And he's like, well, look at you just lost the debate. We're not here to debate Catholicism, like with amazement. And it's either disingenuous or very, I want to be careful, or he's just not reflecting upon how ridiculous it sounds. Maybe that's the nicest way to put it. Now that being said, he says that the Orthodox cannot settle purgatory, Immaculate Conception, all these random things. And let me just say this first. Every time someone dreams up some new wacky idea, that doesn't mean, oh, look, the church 5 minutes later didn't respond to refute this wacky idea. That means they can't settle things, right? Like there's an infinite amount of wacky ideas people can come up with. We don't expect the church have an instant mechanism to respond to every wacky thing. Like we presume that wacky thing has to get big enough for the church to want to respond to. That wacky thing needs to get big enough and important enough for the church to want to respond to. And honestly, there must be some sort of political impetus where people are going to go out of their way, because sadly, a lot of people don't do it out of the goodness of their heart. That's just truth, because there's human sin. Now, that being said, let's just speak purely historically. Pre-schism, the church took centuries to settle things. So the idea is like, we codified Immaculate Conception 1848. Why didn't you respond to it yet? Like, one, that's not even true, because Decree 6 of the Council of Jerusalem 1672 says Theotokos has original sin. So we kind of preempted you with that. And there's also the Council of Constantinople in 1895, which by name lists the Immaculate Conception as a heresy. So that's wrong anyway. The church has already responded to these things. But that aside, generally speaking, it does take centuries for the church to respond to things sometimes. But let me point this out, and we've had videos of this with my response to Timothy Flanders and whatnot, is that the Roman Catholics still have not settled whether Mary died. You think that's pretty important. I mean, the Orthodox literally have a whole holiday, a whole holiday dedicated to her death. This is very settled for us, has been for a very long time. But this is not a settled issue for Roman Catholics, right? If you had a great infallible mechanism, why can't you settle that yet? But even weirder, right? You can say, well, that's a historical thing or whatever. We get to this more detail in my response to Timothy Flanders is they haven't settled what causes death. I mean, that's pretty important. Why do we die? I mean, it's the fact that we do die that we want to be Christians and be saved from death. I mean, so to not know why you die is a pretty big detail that Roman Catholics haven't settled. And that sounds so crazy. Really? They didn't settle that? Yes, they have not settled this extremely important question. The Orthodox have decrees that explain why we die. The Roman Catholics, because of Immaculate Conception, actually have differing theories of how death occurs because it's not settled. This is actually covered in my infallibility video a few videos back. It's like 2 or 3 months ago. So check it out if you want more details. I go through documents from Roman Catholic bishops that show this is not a settled issue for them. But yet the Eastern Orthodox have settled both. So does this refute Voice of Reason's argument? It does. It's one of those things where I would have made him squirm, and I'm surprised it's not spoken about more in apologetics. And I guess they ignore it with good reason, the Roman Catholic side, but it's really one of those glaring things. Like, you have to know why death occurs. At least even Protestant sects have their own versions of why death occurs that are consistent with their worldviews, but Roman Catholics don't. It might be, I think it's the biggest religious ideology that doesn't have a answer that question. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, the Eastern Orthodox and contraception. This came up quite a bit, and I think it's worth talking about. The claim is the Eastern Orthodox have not settled contraception. And the bizarre thing is both sides agreed that, well, the Roman Catholics, for their own, by their own alleged standards, didn't settle the issue in the 1960s. So like, oh, Orthodoxy, we took 1930 years after Christ ascended to heaven to settle this issue. You're about 40, 50 years late right now. You can't be the church. We beat you by 50 years after almost 2,000 years. Already, that sounds like a very bad argument, right? And the reality is, it's not settled for Roman Catholics. That's why I have Amoris Laetitia. This is not settled for Roman Catholics at all. This is a big debate. Go into Roman Catholicism, and go into any Roman Catholic church. Look at the size of the families and watch everyone communing. They are not doing anything. It's a paper dogma, and it's not even a dogma that's settled because there's no ex cathedra statement on the question, because there's no agreement as to what are all the ex cathedra statements to begin with. And I would say more importantly, the categorizations of when it's allowable or not make it where there are senses where it is allowable, like we see in Amoris Laetitia. So this is a real problem for Roman Catholics. It's really not a settled issue. But for Orthodox, because we don't have this like endless regress of magisterial clarifications, we could just look at sacred tradition and know it's settled. And it is settled. Contraception's wrong, because that's the universal teaching in sacred tradition. You won't find any saint that allows for it. You won't find any consensus-based council that allows for it. But we don't have any consensus-based council that disallows for it either and just permits contraception. What we do have in the modern day, and this is something where it would be a mark against Orthodox, is that we do have synods that tolerate contraception on an official basis, like the Moscow Patriarchy. But again, the idea that there are synods with aberrant or non-committal stands on important questions is nowhere new in history. I mean, we've had all sorts of synods have wrong stands on things. We'll get into details where Rome was wrong on things. So, for example, Rome permitted the reception of Gnostic baptisms, right? I think this is something that very quickly Ubie alluded to. But this shows, yeah, a synod could have a aberrant stand and it doesn't end the church, right? And so that's an example. And how about the issue of conditional baptisms? The fact that with the Mormons and Roman Catholics, they're giving them conditional baptisms because they weren't sure whether their baptisms are valid. So this shows that they could have a non-committal stance on an important question. And this is in the modern times. I think it's like 20 years ago when the conditional baptism stopped for Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, or 25 years ago. It's not that long ago. And so the non-committal synodal stands and aberrant stands are not alien to Rome either, not even in the modern era. I mean, isn't Amoris Laetitia a synodical document? So again, aberrant stands are something that happened in the modern era. Now, that being said, we see this from other churches as well. When Milan rejected Cyril's third letter to Nestorius, which was accepted by the Fifth Ecumenical Council, but they rejected it even when accepting the rest of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. So you could have a synod give a aberrant stand on something. Or when Spain rejected Constantinople II into the early 8th century, so like 140 years later, they even accepted Constantinople III before they accepted Constantinople II. And so they were in communion with Rome, but yet this existed. Was that a system defeater for Rome? They're in communion with someone that had an aberrant or non-committal stand on a question. It wasn't then, so how could it be now? The Franks rejected Nicaea II post-schism. We have documents into like almost the late Middle Ages, like the 13th century, Frankish documents where they reject Nicaea II because it was part of the tradition so long to reject that synod. And so Rome was obviously in communion with at that point it was just whatever France was then, right? And the Holy Roman Empire. Was that a system defeater for them? Obviously not. So it's not a system defeater for the Orthodox. We have this comment, Voice of Reason's arguments most relied on is confidence and overconfidence, saying we are debating orthodoxy. Yeah, again, it was a rhetorical sleight of hand, to be perfectly frank. Now, the question of divorce and remarriage came up during the debate. And throughout the debate, so I will speak about it now. Voice of Reason ignored the fact that the Western canons, the Franks particularly, that allowed for divorce, and quite frankly, Jesus allowed for divorce in cases of porneia, right? Porneia means sexual immorality. And so then the question would be, what is the interpretation of porneia? Who gets to interpret it? And obviously the church does. And the church interpreted it to mean adultery, physical, literal adultery, right? Not any reinvention like you married your sister and that's grounds for annulment or something like that. That would invalidate the marriage, right? You can't have a marriage in that case. That's actually annulment. But divorce is allowed for adultery. Now, the church has other examples as well. This is not the video on that. And I also don't like this issue being used as some sort of polemical acts. And it's because in this day and age, marriage is very weak. It's on life support. If anything, maybe we need to economically get rid of some of these canons permitting divorce, because those canons existed to help people in societies where there was almost no divorce, where they ran into these horrible things and they divorced, and then for the church to bring those people back to God, right? Give them penance. They learn the lesson. They come back to God. Okay. But now it's the opposite. Divorce has become so common where it's more common than actually faithful lifelong marriages. And so the economy is actually not bringing people to salvation. We are like the loosening canons that bring people to salvation. It's actually starting to have this opposite effect. And so the church might have to make a canon to say, well, right now, due to the crisis of affecting families and birth rates and the integrity of marriage, we are not going to permit divorce anymore or something like that. But I'm just some apologist. I'm not a bishop. It's really not my say at the end of the day. But that's why it shouldn't be used as this polemical acts. Yes, divorce existed in history. The social situation back then was very different than now, and we shouldn't like put it in a feather cap. We have divorce. We're historically, we have historical fidelity. I mean, it's a bit of a hollow and pyrrhic victory, even if it's a victory. Now, here's an interesting one because it gets into these sort of, I don't know how to nicely say it. That's why there's this delay. I'll just say very neutrally, untrue history of Saint Justinian that Voice of Reason gives, and bizarre history of Saint Justinian. And so let's get into Voice of Reason and slander of Saint Justinian. Now, we said Justinian supposedly a monophysite, and so the employment of his civil code as canonical interpretation is the alleged origin of the Eastern Orthodox radical view of divorce. So, right, he has this conspiracy theory. The reason why Orthodox have divorce is because of Justinian's code. Justinian is a heretic, and so you have this aberrant practice because you interpreted your canons according to a heretic. So, I don't know any historian that seriously makes this argument, and we're going to see in a second, transparently, why this is so wrong. But it's interesting that it hinged upon this conspiracy theory. All right. And so that being said, yes, Justinian in the last year of his life perhaps descended to aphthartodocetism, but he also did not consecrate or at least support for consecration aphthartodocetist bishops. So he either repented of it, as the hagiography said, or it was something exaggerated by his political enemies. It's kind of hard to know. But be it as it may, Justinian's code is cited by Pope John VIII, the Pope in the 9th century, 4 times in his writings to synods. 4 times. And so this idea that you can't canonically use Justinian's code is not something popes would agree with, because they did use Justinian's code. Here is an example. Something no one watching has seen before. And this is why I like to do this in Orthodox Christian theology. Make things available that people have not seen before. And so we have letter 143 by Pope John VIII. And if by chance the illegitimate Godfried or anyone else, due to the adulterer's Engeltrude, acting in any way without her husband's consent, has tried to make a donation of the properties and wishes to dispute the matter, such spurious individuals are to be considered gravely offensive, extremely harsh, and always unworthy in our times. This is confirmed by the decrees of Pope John of Rome, earlier Pope John, and Emperor Justinian. Right? So he's citing his decision, right? The canonical reason for his decision for not to say that Engeltrude, who's an adulterer, has rights to property, is because of our earlier papal decretal and the legal code of Emperor Justinian. So here we literally have an issue that pertains to, I believe, I think there's more than adultery here, if I remember right. I do think it actually has to do with an annulment that he ended up granting. But even if not, the point is, it does pertain to marriage, and he is applying Justinian's code. The exact opposite of what Voice of Reason told everyone. Which is why we got to be careful not to overstate our cases. So we start making conspiracy theories that you've never heard before. You know, scholars made, like he made, again, with Justinian and all this stuff. You better have goods, at least. And in this case, he doesn't. And I think it just came out really bad. Now, we have a comment here. Saint Justinian's relics were incorrupt and admitted so by Rome, which is true. And I would add that I think it might have been a sort of divine smile, Justinian. Like, you were a good saint. You didn't always do everything right. That aptartodocitist stuff was pretty bad. It's not going to make you aptartodocitist. I'm going to make it where you don't corrupt. So I personally think it was he might have been the most incorrupt saint ever, because most incorruptible saints just deteriorate more slowly. They're not incorruptible. They're more slowly corruptible, more accurately. But the Roman Catholics, who didn't at that time honor Justinian as a saint, said his body looked like it didn't corrupt at all, period. He would be probably the most incorrupted saint that ever existed. And the interesting thing is, maybe because, God is all powerful, and it was poetic justice in the truest sense, I would say. Like divine poetic justice is my opinion. Now we have, did Voice of Reason try to say that Justinian created the allowance of divorce? And yes, that was the argument that was made. We have, the church as a whole is against contraception. It's just as legalistic like the Roman Catholic Church. And again, that's worked out with the spiritual father. And it's one of those things where you'd have to go by like a really old priest. What he remembers what a really, really old priest did in the 1800s. What do they do in these situations? And some of these things don't really work their way up the canons, but I'm not here to settle that question. So let's keep going. Reception of converts came up during Voice of Reason's opening and then throughout the debate. And the idea is, well, the reception of converts is diverse in Orthodoxy, and therefore you must be wrong. And the bizarre thing about this, the issue was handled diversely in the first century when Rome was communion with the rest of the church. And so that's self-refuting, and it would disallow this argument being used. And Roman Catholics most certainly rebaptized in Orthodox in Ukraine into the Renaissance. I mean, this is a often recorded complaint over centuries that the Polish are rebaptizing Orthodox and then bringing them into the Latin Church. So does that invalidate Roman Catholicism? Right? It doesn't sound like it's settled that the Roman Catholics were bringing people in different ways. We even spoke about, again, into modern times, conditional baptism. So I will not reiterate it again. I'll just say again, conditional baptism show it's not settled for Roman Catholics into the modern era in the 21st century. Now, something Ubie brought up, I think very well, is that no matter means of reception, everyone is communed. So once the local bishop interprets the canons as he sees are appropriate, and that person's brought into the church, other than another bishop thinking something was done in an invalid sense, there's some argument right now in Cyprus, I won't get more into that, you're communed anyway. So it's not like this is an issue where this keeps people out of the church. It's just a different pastoral approach to how we're going to bring someone into the church. This is something that Ben Christian Luigi brought up, where if you owned your own army uniform and it was the correct issue and everything, and then you actually join the army, it's up to your commanding officer to decide whether or not okay, you could use the one you brought with you, or no, we're going to issue, even though it looks exactly the same, we're going to issue you another uniform just to make sure it's right or whatever. And so that's an issue. That's a decision made by the commanding officer, and the priest is like the commanding officer in this case, or the local bishop and the priest on his behalf. And so that being said, it's something that makes sense that it would be approached pastorally. Now, what I want to know is if this invalidates the Orthodox Church today, why did it not invalidate the Orthodox Church in the 3rd century, which adopted 2 different canons on the question and canonical practices stemming from St. Cyprian and St. Dionysius of Alexandria, right? This is where we're going to take a little bit of time, and you could read Rise and Fall of the Papacy. If you really want everything in a lot of detail, I'm not going to respond to people that say, oh, this is just meme, it's made up, Craig being crazy. Again, sources are there. And we'll go very briefly. St. Stephen was wrong. All right. St. Stephen was wrong. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's just try to get into another overused argument, which is the EP Moscow schism. Who's the church? The Greeks are in schism with Moscow. Is Moscow church, or the Greeks of the church? And there was this feigned ignorance or literal ignorance of tangential communion. And I'm not sure what is worse, because Ubie really tried re-explaining this many, many, many times. In fact, this whole opening statement with a diagram was talking about this. So it was either this disingenuous ignorance, or there was a literal intellectual incapacity. And I'm not sure what's worse. I'll just leave it there. I don't know. I'll let you decide, because we don't even know what the answer, which one it was anyway. I want people to be mindful when there is in the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, liturgy of St. Basil, the pre-sanctified liturgy of St. Gregory the Great, that there's a prayer in the litany for peace in the churches. The presumption in the liturgy is that the ecclesiology of the church allows for these local breaks, like we see the EP in Moscow right now, or that prayer wouldn't even exist. It wouldn't even exist. And so there's this prayer for peace in the churches, and the liturgy preserves this. So this would prove that Voice of Reason's church now has a totally different ecclesiology than the church that created all these historical liturgies. Rome cannot say this prayer and mean it, because their ecclesiology is different, as I said. So let's continue. Now, Voice of Reason repeats the refuted polemic that the Orthodox can't convene another ecumenical council. I went over this, Timothy Flanders. I think he might have actually got it from Timothy Flanders' article, which was in response to Ubie's debate with Eric Ybarra. And so I already responded to this in detail. But I'll just say briefly, because I'm not sure why I have to keep repeating this. It's not that complicated. Orthodox do have binding pan-Orthodox synods. They could call one tomorrow. They called one in 2005. They called one in 1998. Pan-Orthodox, everyone accepting. And so it's like, that might be more than what the Roman Catholics have actually done in that time. So it's like, why do we even have to have this discussion? It's just based on abject ignorance. And I think some people's like, well, those are pan-Orthodox and not ecumenical councils. And this is a word concept fallacy, right? Roman Catholics accept binding non-ecumenical councils, such as Jerusalem in 1950, right? In the year 50, rather. So like, they know you can have binding councils without the term ecumenical. Ecumenical is a specific definition in Nicaea too, where it has a reception of all the patriarchs and their synods in the pentarchy. Right? So when you don't have a full pentarchy anymore, both Rome and the Eastern Orthodox can't have a definitional ecumenical council, but they can still have binding councils like Jerusalem's, and the Orthodox have had binding councils. So that being said, I do think it's strange if we go by the actual definition of the ecumenical council. Rome cannot hold one since 1964 because they no longer have a patriarch of Constantinople. They do have a sort of Armenian bishop of Istanbul. And so maybe they could like pretend that's the Patriarch of Constantinople, but he lacks the title, and it's not a Constantinopolitan synod, it's an Armenian synod. So they don't have a fake Latin Constantinopolitan synod anymore. So I think by any definition, they can't have an ecumenical council anymore since 1964. And so if we're going to be real sticklers like Voice of Reason's trying to be in this debate, then they just disallowed themselves. Now, for those who say, well, the Orthodox don't have these list of pan-Orthodox synods, it's some sort of pop apologetic. And first I'll say this. If it's a pop apologetic, it's a very new one, because really the first two people to really do this is Ben Bollinger, who sadly apostatized, and myself, right? We're the first people to say, no, we got to look at publicly and give a rationale. So we got to look at these pan-Orthodox synods, in apologetics. But for the actual conciliar and dogmatic authorities, they've known about these for a long time. Like Creed 2016 is the most recent example of normie bishops acknowledging that we have binding pan-Orthodox synods. And amongst that list is Concil 4, the great councils of Gregory Palamas, Concil 1484, the anti-Protestant councils and like St. Peter Mogila and Jerusalem. And they mentioned another one in 1872. Now, just to say real briefly, Creed's list is matched by lists given by dogmatists in the 20th century, like St. Justin Popovich. It's accepted by all the jurisdictions, like Antioch and Moscow and Bulgaria, accept the same list of binding councils. So you don't need them to have, they didn't show up the Creed 2016, so we don't know if they accept these councils or not, because we have recent synodical documents where they do accept these councils. So these councils are binding for the Eastern Orthodox. Now, I would point out that 1848 is missing from that list, and this is something that's on the books for all those synods. So that's a binding council for those who want to read it or just know more about it. And the 1872 council, sort of like Crete, has not been fully received. And so, honestly speaking, it is not a pan-Orthodox synod yet. And just so people know, this occurred in the past, like Nicaea II. Rome only halfway received it and then didn't fully receive it until 100 years later. So like delayed reception of a binding synod, even ecumenical synod, is something that's occurred before. And we even said, if you're going to go with the Franks outside of Rome, we're going to the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, until they accepted Nicaea II. So this is something that that historians are privy to and should not surprise people. And I will just point out, Rome has a fallible list of ecumenical councils. And so we really don't know what councils they consider ecumenical anyway. Which ones have they really received? We don't have an infallible list. So the idea that, look, Creed 2016 mentions 1872 and it's not really pan-Orthodox. Like, well, maybe it's not settled. You have stuff that's not settled too. It's not a system defeater. And so just keep that in mind. As I already said, Sophia in 1998, which decided the correct Church of Bulgaria, and Istanbul in 2005, which opposed the Patriarch of Jerusalem. We've had pan-Orthodox binding synods in the modern day. And yeah, we will get into the Filioque bit. I've got some comments on that. I've definitely got some comments. All right. So before we keep going, I'll just do a couple audience comments. It's always amazing. Come on. How self-refuting many Catholic arguments are, not only bad arguments, but show that they're completely unaware of historical Christianity, which is true. They're only historical compared to Protestants, which is why with Orthodox, they start saying doctrinal development, epistemology, all this stuff. They start getting into like this philosophical stuff because they can't really argue that historical church, because they're clearly not. Clearly not. We have this. This is ridiculous. The Greek-Russian schism isn't a schism. It's a break in communion, not excommunication. And as Ubie brought up, that you could still commune in a Greek church and in a Russian church. The laity could still do that. I had a ROCOR bishop say that right in front of me before he passed away. So this is something I've seen a bishop give a judgment right in front of me. It's not an opinion. So there you go. Voice of Reason said, is this how the church is supposed to operate? Is a rhetorical question, the answer being no. And this may be a disingenuous talking point from Voice of Reason, as he was continually corrected on this is precisely how the church operated in the first millennium, or it may be he couldn't compute this, or he just refused to acknowledge it. It was just a bad argument for reasons we already stated. He talked about how the East Orthodox Church is too ethnic. And I thought Ubie gave an interesting answer because he mentioned all the ethnic Roman Catholic churches that you could pass by without, English without English masses. And there's in Syracuse still a Polish church with a Polish mass, and they still have a Latin mass. And it's like, oh, it's a foreign language and no one knows. So, there you go. It's that stuff still exists. And there's really multicultural Orthodox churches, and there's really ethnic Orthodox churches, just like the same in Roman Catholicism. We have this ethnic for me, but not for thee. There you go. The churches I attend are very ethnic, but I'm in the Northeast. That's more common. Now that being said, he claimed that Eastern Orthodoxy is not a universal name, and this is such a bad argument. It's kind of like a grade school argument. Well, your name sounds not universal. And I just want to point something out to people, because if I didn't read this from the Latin and then translate to English, I would have not believed it. But the terms Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox pre-exist the schism. Pope Nicholas used the term Roman Catholic, and Pope Adrian spoke of the term Eastern Orthodox, and they both use these terms positively. So these are pre-schism terminologies that just kind of focus on where those synods happen to be for obvious reasons. They're not meant to de-universalize either church. And so it's just a bad kind of kindergarten argument. It's a very bad argument. Because, like, again, to repeat, Pope Nicholas used the term Roman Catholic. Pope Adrian spoke positively of Eastern bishops as Eastern Orthodox. It's in the primary sources. We have the official name, just so people know, you could see this in Creed 2016, is we are the Orthodox Catholic Church. So, like, we have a real official name, and that's what it is. So if you're wondering what the church's real name is, Eastern Orthodox is kind of like a popular nickname of sorts. In conciliar documents, it's the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church or Orthodox Catholic Church is what you'll see. Then there's this crazy claim that we have no universal catechism, which comes out really self-refuting if we look at the details, because this is incorrect. The Council of Yassi, which we saw in modern synodical documents, actually has a pan-Orthodox catechism. So we actually have one. And similarly, the Roman Catholics lacked a universal catechism until the 1500s. And so two things. First, we both got universal catechisms near the same time, so I don't know why one would be better than the other, I suppose. And two, it's a self-refuting standard, because if we need a universal catechism, then neither of us are universal church until way into the second millennium. So it's just really bad. But why was Voice of Reason transparently inconsistent with the standard, right? Like, he knows that their catechism came after Trent. So why would he even bring this up? It's honestly an embarrassing argument, and I won't speculate as to why he brought this argument up. It's just he did. Now, unlike the Orthodox, Roman Catholics have changed their catechism, like on the death penalty and stuff. And so it shows you their catechism does not settle issues. St. Peter Mugilo's catechism, after it was edited by the 1642 Council, has never changed. So that's exactly the same. So that actually kind of shows you that we have it settled and you don't. All right. He made the point that Macedonia is still in schism, which I guess he's just behind on the news because they're not. Macedonians have been back in communion for about 2 years now, maybe 3. Now, Ubie's rebuttal. Ubie in the beginning, like, he said something like, I can't believe this, or that was terrible. Some sort of like emphatic statement that people said was uncharitable. And to be perfectly frank, I'm not sure if uncharitable is the right word for it. I think he was actually legitimately astonished. Like, Voice of Reason's huge. He's got a very big channel, right? He's got a very big following. God help him, right? He's huge, and that's what he came out with. It kind of amazes you. Like, this can't be serious, right? This can't be serious. And so Ubie doesn't have the biggest history for being charitable. I think he'll admit that. I'm not trying to rag on him. He'll admit that, But even I, who am considered pretty charitable, like, I might have been amazed. And that's why actually I don't want a debate, right? I'm not interested in debate with Voice of Reason or anyone I think that uses these dishonest debate tactics, because the reason is I'm not going to fight with one hand behind my back in person. I might be one way in the internet, but in person, I'm not going to do that. If you're gonna fight dirty in the debate, I'm gonna fight dirty back. And if I feel it's a disservice to Christianity, I'd rather just avoid the situation. So I'm not interested in in-person debate if someone's gonna do that, because I'm gonna lay into you big time, worse than what Ubie did, for such astonishingly bad arguments in person, because I'm not going to let myself be bested because I somehow wasn't assertive enough in person. Here, I could take my time to give a qualified response. In person, I'm not going to do that. And so I'd rather avoid it, honestly. And so, like, I'm trying to be nice here. And again, I'll extend again, I'll have a private conversation. If you're in New York, I'll take you to dinner. I'll pay for it. I got a job. You know, come have dinner. We'll laugh about the debate. I'm not trying to be a jerk here. Honestly, not trying to be a jerk. Okay. I'm saying this because this is my actual conviction, my real opinion of this. And again, like when they comment, it was very surprised how someone so large could use such a bad set of arguments. And it's true. It's not, this debate's not going to age well. And so is the debate worth watching? And I actually don't think so. And we'll get into details why. Now, Ubie's rebuttal covers on my previous points, but I liked this one-liner during it where he said, "You would not do well in the first millennium church." I mean, right? He wouldn't, because what he believes is not the historical church. Now, we see this from Avery. He should have capitalized on Rome breaking the truce between John VIII and the West Constantinople IV, but I don't remember him bringing that up. And yes, we'll get into this a little bit. But Ubie's really not an expert in the 9th century. He doesn't write on it at all. He's probably something he's still studying. And yes, that's something I would have brought him more to task on. And I've covered this in Who Started the Great Schism. That was one of my videos. I cover this in Rise and Fall of the Papacy. So it's a very good point and one that should have been brought up. We have a problem with the Roman Catholic versus Orthodox debate from a historical perspective is it would take a day and a half cross-checking quote minds, translations, forgeries, outright lies. Yes. This is why if I do an in-person debate, my rule would be no computers, all right? No computers and no books in front of us. You know, no handwritten notes. It's literally just two people. And the reason I'd want that is that way the person go, I believe this is what's said. We'll have to double check the source. And then the person said, if you really thought it wasn't fake, like, I don't know, I think we're gonna have to check that. And without the person going, oh no, I got it right here, you know, and try to score that point, I think it actually allows the people to go and look it up as they should. So in-person debate, I'm not doing computers, I'm not doing slideshows. It's going to be a real debate. It's like Lincoln and Douglas. There ain't going to be piles of books next to them. We have this. I thought Ubie was essentially a papist for Nema, but replaced ex cathedra infallibly with whenever all the patriarchates agree. He's stuck in papist categories of thought. And I'll just say charitably, and sometimes we make condescensions to language and concepts people understand. We spoke about this before, folks, too. Like, I'll use the term magisterium because it's useful and it works and it's true. But yes, you won't find that term used in Orthodox documents. I try to create the more neutral term, but still a new term, consensus-based ecclesiology. You'll find the term consent all over Orthodox and patristic documents, but I added based ecclesiology so people know that that's what it's in reference to. So we have that. So anyway, let's continue. Voice of Reason's rebuttal was very bad. He did again, but we're not here debating Catholicism. And really, Ubie was just trying to show him that he was inconsistent. And at no point was Voice of Reason really even addressing that Orthodoxy is not the church. He was giving a bunch of random things that had no application in the first millennium. It came across maybe good to people because of maybe how deep his voice is. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But it really was not a good argument. And it really was it was a rhetorical device and not a real honest debate tactic. Because all the things that Ubie said were literal responses to his own points, which had nothing to do with Catholicity, right? And so you're faulting the person for responding to your argument. That's what a rebuttal is for. And so I just found it to be dishonest, honestly. We have this, Ubie got dismantled. If you don't think so, wow. Well, maybe this video will help you. So, please hang out. So that being said, I do think that Voice of Reason correctly pointed out that Meletius was likely, he said definitely, but was likely in communion with the Pope. And that might be the only true statement he made in 5 hours. It was pretty painful. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but I don't remember. I just don't remember. I could have bad memory, but I honestly don't remember another true statement within that 5 hours. That might have been the only true statement he made. And that's pretty bad. And we'll get to why. That's why I don't recommend the debate. It's I couldn't have a debate with someone where everything they say is wrong. Because there's a certain point where I'm going to say, listen, you don't belong in the stage here. Right? Or if we're going to debate, you probably need to stand a little lower than I stand. So people understand where this is a condescension me speaking to you about this. And I know that sounds like really mean thing to say, but if literally nothing comes out that's factual for 5 hours, that's like me talking to a 5-year-old. There's a point where they got to learn and listen. And so I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a jerk. It's just, it was really that bad. And again, I say this due to, again, having done historical research. And so maybe it doesn't come across this as some of these commenters, because they might have not. They could be newbies, or they aren't, they don't have historical backgrounds, and they just might not know, right? They just might not know. But I couldn't have a debate with someone that really is that illy prepared to speak about the topics. Now, he falsely claimed, Voice of Reason, that Cyprian was wrong, and this depends upon a wrong history of Saint Cyprian. Now, we have this right before we get to the history of the rebaptism controversy. Wait, Meletius is in communion with the Pope. This is discussed in The Rise and Fall of the Papacy. I cite Lester Field's study on Pope Damasus, and we have a document where Meletius essentially made a deal that if he dies first, Paulinus becomes bishop at Antioch, and if Paulinus dies first, he becomes bishop at Antioch. And with that deal, at least on paper, peace was made between those two churches. So it's kind of a pop Orthodox apologetic. I used to repeat it, but when you get into nitty-gritty and sources, probability is yes, they were in communion, not for their entire bishoprics. And the supposed Meletian schism, because then it was St. Flavian afterwards, ended because Rome relented. Even bishops within Rome's local jurisdiction, like Thessalonica, were in communion with Antioch, but Rome wasn't. And Rome eventually gave up because the Roman emperor told them to give up. So it's the real details are different than pop apologetics, but they're also very damaging for Roman Catholic side. I cover this in my response video to he did that little documentary. He's the guy that does the documentaries for Christian Wagner, Union Initiative, the Union Initiative video on the Meletian schism. There's a response video I have, has all the details on it if you want to look it up. So let's get into the rebaptism controversy. Okay. Now I'm aware what St. Jerome says. I'm aware what St. Augustine says. I'm even aware what Eusebius says. I'm going to give you a history from the primary sources from the actual time. So what's more accurate? Someone writing 40, 50 years later, someone writing 100 years later, and someone writing 150 years later, or the sources at the time? Obviously, the sources at the time. And so here's what we find out going by the letters of Saints Firmilian, Cyprian, and Dionysius Alexander, and fragments of St. Stephen. So we have sources from all these guys, all right? They're still extant. And here's what happened according to the sources. Here's a fragment from St. Cyprian's letter where he's quoting, all right? He's quoting Pope Stephen. Pope Stephen wrote, even those that came from him, he's speaking of Marcion, did not need to be baptized because they seemed to have been already baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. Right? So he's flagrantly saying he accepts Marcionite, which is a Gnostic baptism. So it's not my opinion. That's right in, again, a fragment of St. Stephen. Here's another fragment of St. Stephen. If anyone therefore come to you from any heresy whatever, let nothing be innovated or done which has not been handed down, to wit, that hands be imposed on him for repentance, since the heretics themselves in their own proper character do not baptize such as come to them from one another, but only admit them to communion. So he says, from any heresy, whatever, right, to receive them the same way the heretics receive one another. This was his decree. Now, the Roman Catholics don't do this anymore because they don't accept Jehovah's Witness and Mormon baptisms anymore. So this is a pretty good example that Rome doesn't hold to St. Stephen's doctrine here. Okay. Firmilian and Dionysius took Cyprian's side. This is explicit in all their letters. Now, St. Dionysius Alexandria actually had a more moderate baptismal position as Cyprian, but because they were so against Stephen's Marcionite baptism position, they saw themselves more in common than with Stephen. And it was Cyprian's and Dionysius' views that became canon law, not Stephen's. So this whole idea that Cyprian was wrong, well, his view became canon law. Dionysius' view became canon law. Stephen's view was not canon law. In fact, it was forgotten. We have Dionysius of Rome, my final bullet point, saying that was supposedly formerly held the same opinion as Stephen. Right? So Dionysius of Alexandria says the next pope, Dionysius of Rome, formerly had Stephen's opinion. So Rome changed their opinion on baptism. Again, this is all right there in the primary sources. I don't know why other people don't talk about this, but right there in the sources, and covered in detail in Rise and Fall of the Papacy. And if you want any proof that Dionysius approves of Cyprian and not, if somehow not obvious enough, and not Stephen, he quotes Cyprian in his Arminian letter too. Like he actually quotes him as he doesn't say Cyprian says, he quotes words from him as an argument. So he crypts an argument from Cyprian in responding to Stephen, argument from Cyprian in responding to Stephen. And Eusebius Church History 7:2-3, he speaks of how synods rejected Stephen. So he's not writing in favor of Stephen. He's writing in favor of Cyprian. So anyway, let's continue. And guys, if you have questions, please ask them. We'll cover them in the end of the presentation. The rebuttal on more bad points. He disingenuously claimed that Carthage's canon settled the biblical canon, which is not true in the First Millennium Church because there's all different canons. But it's worth saying is true in the Western Church because in Western canon law, Dionysius Exegeus, he just cites Carthage's canon, and that becomes their biblical canon in the West. And papal decretals will repeat it. Now, there was this question, who decides autocephaly? And it really wasn't clearly answered by Ubie. I'll give the clear answer now. Ideally, it's the mother church, but they need the consent of all the other churches. You need a pan-Orthodox decision. And this is true of Cyprus during the Council of Ephesus. That's how Cyprus got autocephaly from Antioch. And so this occurred in ecumenical councils. This is not some sort of mystery. And autonomy in the Creed 2016 document spoken of this way, but not specifically autocephaly, is worth pointing out. Now, Constable 2 is ecumenical because the Pope said so. There's an argument that Voice of Reason made. And I just want to say that the spiritual authority of the council preceded Vigilius' assent. They spoke about themselves as directed by the Holy Spirit before Vigilius assented to the council. And he accepted a council that issued decrees by the Spirit before he assented himself. And so, no, it did not hinge on Pope Vigilius. Vigilius' assent to the council merely vindicates, shows to be true the council's work. The consent of the synods shows to be true what the councils do. The same occurred with Ephesus, right? And waited until 433 when Antioch received the council for people to know the council is true. Now, the council, the council inspired by the Holy Spirit. In fact, before Rome came, it deposed people, and Rome had to then accept the depositions as valid, which means the council acted even authoritatively, even without Rome there, let alone Antioch. So 1 second, I'm just going to cough my brains out and put this on mute. I'm still here. I just have to give my throat a break. I have audience in the background, but he needs to be quiet. Stay there. All right. So we'll get into some more details. For people who think, though, this is not a workable way of ecumenical councils going, let me just say it's analogous to Scripture and canon. Scripture is breathed out by God and has authority before there was any biblical canon. It didn't wait for 400 years for Carthage to occur, and it didn't wait for Trent or for Jerusalem 6 and 72 for the Scriptures to have authority. They had authority because of where it came from God, right? It was just the canon that's where we could recognize this is what had authority. And so if we accept this for biblical canon, obviously it's not an issue for ecumenical councils. So that's worth bringing up. Now, there's a claim of a Metropolitan Hilarion in the Moscow Patriarchate is a Universalist. Again, this is a disgraced bishop in exile. I won't get into details. So really don't see how this is a system to be the feeder for the Eastern Orthodox. But one second. I got noisy people in the... So that being said, in the Roman Catholic Church, we have Cardinal Cantalamessa and Bishop Barron are hopeful Universalists. There's many more, so they have the same problem. And we can literally find dozens of Roman Catholic bishops and even pontifical statements concerning Vatican I and the Filioque backing off from them, right? So these are hypocritically less binding to voice of reason. And these are synodical statements and documents with many bishops writing on them and pontifical commissions from the Pope are somehow less binding, even though they're reversing dogmas he believes in, than one gadfly bishop in Orthodoxy. So it's a very inconsistent standard, very inconsistent standard. Now, during cross-exam, I felt that Voice of Reason's response was like a very word salady or like Chat GPT-like. Tangential communion was explained to him again and again and again, and he just didn't want to like understand it or acknowledge it, and he kind of this meaningless response. It's just, I don't know, it wasn't very compelling. Voice of Reason claimed that the Pope in the first millennium was right on every side of the dispute. That's just wrong, right? The Pope was on the wrong side of the baptism controversies we showed, right? His view did not become canon law. That's just fact. He had a view of Gnostic baptisms, which aren't accepted today by Rome. So wrong. Rome was wrong on the Meletian holy orders. Rome reneged on this and accepted Flavian and the holy orders descending from Meletius. In the 5th century, they were wrong with their communion in Thessalonica, which was in communion with the Miaphysites. In the 6th century, they were wrong in the 3 chapters, right? Vigilius had to then condemn the 3 chapters. Initially, they were not going to condemn the 3 chapters. They were wrong. In the 7th century, they were wrong in monothelitism. They literally invented the word and supported and gave support to the synods that believed in monoenergism, monothelitism. They denounced Saint Sophronius, entered communion with the monothelites in the 670s. Pope Vitalian did. So, like, they were wrong on these issues. So, without getting to the nitty gritty, oh, well, depends on wrong, ex cathedra, like these categories of wrong. The point is, you said they were on the right side of every dispute. It's just not true. All right. Voice of Reason claims the First Millennium Church had no universal practice for reception ovations. And one, let's just say that is true. It's not, but let's just say it is true. Why is it necessary now if it wasn't necessary then? Like, I didn't know, like, it's like getting married and all of a sudden your wife demands more from you, like, than when you first met. Like, oh, we used to go on a date night every Friday. Now it's got to be 5 nights a week. Like, where did this come from? 10 years later or something like that. Why something become more necessary than it was in the beginning? Like, you would have to prove that to even use this as an argument. And the second thing is, no, canons actually say how novations are received. It's by vesting and repentance. There is no canon that you rebaptize. Novations, those Cyprian's canon, actually. Yeah, there's Cyprian's canon, which would be for the schismatics. And you could interpret the apostolic canons that way. But when they explicitly reference novations in particular, it's by vesting. So there you go. There's the answer. We have this question. Do you accept purgatory? No. And we'll get into detail why. but we accept something very analogous to neo-purgatory, because Roman Catholics have changed their doctrine. But yes, we do believe in a purification process before heaven. It does exist. We have John Colarafi here. Excellent. We plugged your book in the beginning. I think the papal decretals address the reception ovationists, and yes, as do other canons, definitely. But yeah, then this would also show that it's settled even for his side in the first millennium. Anyway, the cross-exam voice of reason was rhetorical and aggressive, and this is worth reflecting upon a little bit, right? I had a boss who would just speak louder and louder and louder to contradict the point. He wouldn't improve his argument. He wouldn't articulate a response to what you said. He'd just get louder. And this works when someone has a deep voice. Because let's say if Ubie were to try to get louder and louder and louder, his tone would get higher to the point it gets shrill, which just sounds bad for men. And voice of reason has like a great radio voice, so get louder and louder and louder. And it just starts sounding aggressive and scary because he's got such a deep voice. And so it could be used to rhetorical effect, but you have to listen to the words, right? It's just not how his words sound, but the words. And he's just using the rhetorical effect of the deep voice. So God bless the deep voice bros, but those of us without such deep voices, we still have important things to say too, right? And so, yes, it's a rhetorical strategy, as I point out. And this is like a reason for no debate. Because unless I can say, listen, you keep roaring louder, but you're not making a point here. Because unless I could respond like that, which would be uncharitable, then how do you respond to someone doing that? Because it's not very charitable that I'm just going to speak louder and more harsh if I disagree with you, and people will think I just made a point, right? How do you respond to that? There's really no nice way to respond to it other than pointing out what you're doing is rhetorical. You're not articulating a different view. And we have this from Cleave to Antiquity, the Sylvester Stallone fallacy. I guess it is a kind of fallacy now, but yes. Voice reason is a deeper voice, so Ubie lost. There you go. There you go. It's there is something to that. Louder and deeper. All right. It was louder. It definitely was. I'm just saying. You go. Someone get the decibel meter and test it. You sounded like a pyramid scheme conference sales manipulating the audience. That's just not nice. Yeah, I mean, a guy blessed with a voice like that shouldn't not use it, right? Like, you should use your blessings. There's nothing wrong with using it. It should just articulate. It should be coupled with a good position to articulate. That's all I'm saying. And so if you have the deep voice version of Craig with same arguments, but sounds better, then support his mission to Thailand instead of my mission to Cambodia, because he's better than me. But if there's one that just has a deep voice and the other that actually articulates better positions, I'd go with the one that articulates better positions. Now, Ubie and Contraception, I have to respectfully disagree with him, but it's worth saying he's effectively giving stance to the Russian Synod. So I'm not going to fault him categorically, but yeah, and sacred tradition is against contraception. Now, voice of reason during the cross exam makes hay over miscellaneous unsettled issues. And again, this is where I just would have took them to task that they have not and cannot settle what causes death, right? That's more important than a lot of the nonsense they're bringing up. But we already addressed this, so I won't go further. During cross exam, voice of reason did not understand tangential communion. And some point during this, like, Ubie was losing it and saying, like, are you serious? And like, yeah, this sounds uncharitable. I understand. But this is a good question. I think I would have been seriously surprised if I were in his shoes. And you have to remember, he is like, got all this adrenaline running through him. He's in person, and that's just what's going to happen. So like, I just think it was him being honest with my real view. And personally, right, if you could take the adrenaline down, you'd want to not say that, but it is pretty incredible. It was pretty incredible. These things were being said. 1 second. All right, I got a loud audience here. All right, and let's see. The canon came up again during the sit-down portion of the debate. And the Orthodox diversity in the question actually historically had Roman Catholic adherents. It's worth pointing out. We had people after Trent that said, oh, well, there might be ways to understand that, the Deuterocanon's less inspired than the rest of the canon, and it doesn't definitively close which ones could be added to the Deuterocanon. And so my guess is like with purgatory, Roman Catholic theologians will end up backing into the juridical Orthodox view, right? They'll say, yes, we've got this statement from Trent, but there's nuances to canon that, Trent doesn't talk about, and then they'll nuance their way to the Orthodox position. So I think that's what's going to ultimately happen. Now, Voice of Reason thinks Chalcedon was not accepted by Alexandria, and my gosh, I mean, Ubie was right. It's just not historically true. The Alexandrian Synod accepted Chalcedon, and they consecrated a bishop that accepted Chalcedon, and that was the consensus view of the Alexandrian Synod other than one bishop until they killed that patriarch. And I guess everyone else got scared, and they, turned the tables on him. So yes, Chalcedon was accepted. That's just historical fact. And so, yeah, again, it's sort of like, well, I heard an Oriental Orthodox person without a citation say this one time, so it's got to be true. And there's not much more to it. Now, during the sit-down portion of the debate, Ubie did not have a good response to questions on Constable 869 and 879. And we have the book from Uncut Mountain Press, which I have behind me here. My head's in the way. And these you need the minutes of the councils of those of 869 and then really understand what's going on, and you could get a good background in that if you get the book from Uncut Mountain Press. Now, apologists are not God. So let's say if Ubie, like you said, he hasn't finished reading some of these things, it's okay to say you haven't read something, right? That's why I'd want to debate like without all the books. So I can say, listen, I'd have to get back to you on this. Here's what I think it is, and I will issue a correction if I'm wrong. Or there's nothing wrong with saying that. Now, 869, unlike what Voice of Reason says, was not a real ecumenical council. It had fake legates. I mean, they're the fakest legates you could ever see if you read the minutes. It had really fake legates, and so they couldn't sign for the synods they represented. And 879 was received by everyone, including Rome. That's why we have an acceptance letter from Pope John VIII. It's not Orthodox cringe. It's quoted by Dvornik. I don't know why there's debate about this. The Pope accepted it. The canons of the council found their way into Western canon law. They're in Gratian. They're in Evo chart. And so it was received. I just don't know what other standard you want that the West received 879. Now, Ubie rightly pointed out that Roman legates accepted 861, and the council in 861 even found its way in Dustedet's canon law, which showed you that somewhere in the Roman archives, they're still using this thing. So it's there's more that could be said. If people have more questions on this, I'll get into it. There's a whole video on Orthodox Ethos where I get into a lot of the canonical questions on 879 and 861. You can definitely check it out at the Orthodox Ethos channel. Now, Ubie oddly submitted to a random pop quiz on the Filioque during this, which I thought was really bizarre. Maybe it was agreed to beforehand and he just couldn't go back on his word, but I would have never done this. I'd be like, what on earth are you doing? I'm not doing a pop quiz with gotcha questions. It's crazy. Do you have a real argument here? I would have never submitted this pop quiz, but it was a total low blow tactic. It was nonsense. It was unprofessional. It was unprofessional to submit to the pop quiz. Again, maybe there's an agreement. So I'm giving impressions. I could be totally wrong. But it was unprofessional to broach the topic, let alone actually give the pop quiz in the debate. It was just really, really bad. Really, really bad to do. But the short answer is, of course, in those quotes, there's two limited contexts that differentiate between hypostatic versus temporal processions, period. And so like you hear it go, well, if this is about a temporal procession, it's correct. It's about a hypostatic procession, it's wrong. And then, the deep voice is going to come back and say, well, clearly it's evidently about the hypostatic procession because it has to be. Well, if we have a whole debate on this book, then maybe we could talk about that. But I guess that is not what this debate's about now, is it? So that being said, it was not relevant to the debate topic. I don't know why it occurred. This is where if there's in-person moderators, they need to step in with this stuff. I would expect the person to go, this is ridiculous, stop. Right? Like I would expect that a moderator stop something. And so anyway, pretty bizarre part of the debate. St. Irenaeus and the Pascha controversy came up. And the short response by Ubie was there was an attempted excommunication. So that way, Pope Victor didn't have the authority to do anything there. But I think more relevant is that the world synods, as covered in the Rise and Fall of the Papacy, rejected Pope Victor. That's what St. Irenaeus says. And that Victor was Eusebius says, in quoting Irenaeus and other people. And Victor was trying to make local jurisdictional claims over Ephesus. That was the real argument at issue. It wasn't over universal jurisdiction. It was over jurisdiction over Ephesus. And that's why Polycrates' letter of Ephesus cited relics, but did not mention Timothy, who died in Ephesus. And his relics were there. And that's known historical fact. It's even commemorated when they transferred the relics. And so that being said, it's the local jurisdictional claims over Ephesus was this whole argument, and everyone rejected Rome's local jurisdictional claims over Ephesus, and the world synods rejected Pope Victor. It's not an example of some sort of like papal win. It's a papal L by any definition. Voice of Reason. Then this, I've been making fun of this a little bit, and if I hope Voice of Reason has a sense of humor. I couldn't help myself. Maybe it's me being a little jerk. I really don't think so, because he claimed that a secret bishop supposedly rejected transubstantiation, and that the secret bishop is proof that Jerusalem 1672 didn't settle the question. How does one seriously respond to something like that? Right? How does one seriously respond to, I know someone secretly tells me something? I would have said, I know a secret cardinal who told me the Pope thinks the orthodoxy is right. Prove me wrong. I just can't believe this came up with, it was so absurdly unprofessional. This is when a moderator has to say, listen, this is nonsense. You have to stop. Like the moderator has to step in. I just don't, it's unbelievable. It's an absurdly slimy or absurdly naive debate tactic, presuming honesty. You know, I just don't know. I just don't know. So it says, why don't you debate VOR? I'm not big enough to debate VOR. And again, like I'm not open to it, not because I'm afraid, because I would have to say in the middle of the debate in front of a lot of people and humiliate someone and go, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. And because I'm not gonna fight with two hands behind my back if I'm in person with someone. With videos, I can nuance things. I can offer clarifications. I can take as much time I need. I'm not going to do that in a person debate. And I would have to think very long and hard, because like, I don't know what kind of testimony that makes for Jesus. Yeah, I could win a debate by, proving that someone is being completely unprofessional and slimy if they're using a slimy debate tactic, or dishonest or naive. But I don't want to make a person look bad. I want to debate an issue. I don't want to debate a person. I'll repeat that again. I want to debate an issue. I don't want to debate a person. All right. And so I think he can land. Ubie doesn't have that big a channel, but he has more of a following because of Jay Dyer's Discord server and stuff like that. I have the bigger channel per se, and I'm more published than Ubie is and things like that. But it's, at the end of the day, I'm not as big of a commodity, and whatever. I'm fine with that. God help Ubie, God help me, God help all of us where we need to be. So let me give a summary and some final thoughts on the debate. Now, Voice of Reason clearly lost in the debate. He clearly lost. I don't think any mature and someone with average intelligence could think otherwise. Because he had a highly defective content and a highly defective rhetorical style. And that's why he lost. I mean, if you lose it because your style and points make no sense, then that's just lost. So like, we got a meme on the bottom right. It's from the movie Billy Madison. And it says, everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. And this meme sounds mean, but I actually think it's accurate. I do not recommend this debate. You do not get smarter watching it. You do not learn anything. There's lots of disinformation. There's a lot of rhetoric. It stokes passions. It's totally not useful. If you just listen to Ubie, you would have learned something, and you've got one potentially wrong thing on the Malaysian schism. And, Antarctica, and we'll get a little to this, maybe Antarctica, and what churches are in Antarctica. But like generally speaking, you would have learned something from Ubie. At least we got someone admitting it. I have below average. When they consider me below average intelligence, Ubie got pounded, and it's okay. I'm appreciative of your humility. Now, the problem with the debate is a larger problem with apologetics. It was style over substance, right? Dub, right? He's a little below intelligence, as he says, right? So the style is what would convince someone like him, but not the substance. He can't understand the substance. Now, Ubie's read pretty much all the stuff I've read. And there's some stuff he's read more of and some stuff he's read less of. So that's why he saw this as an issue of facts and was amazed at the things he was being told because he understood the facts at question, right? Again, like I published a book, I'm amazed at the things I'm hearing because they're incredibly wrong and naive. But someone who doesn't have that background just knows how it sounds. And so it's the style that convinces them. And that's the limitation of the debate format. And that's why there needs to be good faith going in, right? Without good faith going in, and without good moderation, you can't have a good debate. It needs to be about the facts, not about the people, not about the style. I think in apologetics, we have information overload and people don't know what to believe is true. And it's just going to get worse once we start getting fake patristic quotes and eventually entire fake documents from AI. That will eventually happen where you're going to be very grateful to have physical books that were written before 2025, let's say, because you're going to know if it's in a book that's printed before 2025, at least it's most likely real stuff that's inside, because we will get to that in 20 years. You'll see. And there's too much information. And so when something's not informative, right? Like this debate's not informative. People don't even know it's not informative because they're so overwhelmed. And so I'm telling you, if you could trust me on anything, this was not an informative debate unless you just listen to Ubie Petrus. You don't even have to agree with Ubie Petrus. You could just get content from him. But Voice of Reason just did not bring any true content on his side other than perhaps in the Malaysian schism. People are not learning. I hear horror stories about college students using their phones and AI to get answers to questions on the projector screen and using AI to write their papers. And we're starting to get a dangerously ignorant society. And it's trickling down into apologetics where people don't even know what's true, what's not. And all I can tell you is God help you. I can help you. I could do some historical research. I could share with you what I've learned. And that's as much as I could do. God help you. But all of us apologists maybe have to stop doing all the theatrics and all the nonsense and really start taking apologetics seriously, start taking arguments and facts seriously. And maybe we got to start punishing by not supporting the people that are going over style. They're cursing people out. They're getting to gossip streams, and they're getting into anger streams and stuff like that. And maybe we got to start boycotting that stuff because that's killing apologetics. And what's infotainment is becoming disinfotainment because a little bit of information is always part of disinfo. You can't justify like, oh, well, some people are learning a little bit along the way. No justification. This apologetics environment is toxic and people are getting stupider. People are not learning. They're getting less, and we got to address this. So let's change this, Voice of Reason. Let's change this, Ubie. I know you want to make videos about guys in their trailers. You already have. I get it. But maybe we got to all start changing the tone, and we got to change the style and start taking these facts more serious. Or we got to totally compartmentalize joke streams versus fact streams and debates, which need to be about facts, and things about people, which I don't know, what are we, People magazine? I just think it's effeminate to get into the actual individuals. That's why in all this, I presume Voice of Reason is a very good apologist, in all honesty. I just think he had a terrible debate performance. Maybe he was intimidated dealing with someone that just knew so many more facts than him in Ubie, so he just totally hedged his bets on a rhetorical performance. I have to presume his actual videos have more content. I don't think he would get so big. I never watched any of his videos, so I'm going to presume the best, and I'm probably better because of it. So that being said, let me give a warning from the scriptures, because I guarantee you all the big name apologists, they got to feel some pang in their conscience when they get into the apologetics of personal destruction, when they get to the ad hominems, when they get into the rhetorical flails, and they have to probably justify it to themselves and say, well, I did this because it's helping the truth. But what's the scripture say? Job says, will you speak wickedly for God and talk deceitfully for him? Will you show partiality for him? Will you contend for God? Will it be well when he searches you out? Or can you mock him as one mocks a man? He will surely rebuke you if you secretly, let alone publicly, I'll add, show partiality. So don't show partiality. Don't lie for God. Don't deceive for God. He doesn't need your lies. He doesn't need your deceits. He doesn't need your ad homs. You're not helping the church. You're not helping the world. You, in fact, will reap your own punishment. And I would not want that for you. And so that's the warning from the scriptures. Now, guys, this is a time for your audience questions. We will cover audience questions. And before I do so, I just want to remind people, if this video has blessed you, if it's helped you, please go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Links are below. PayPal's preferred. But there's also Venmo. There's also for monthly contributors, the Cambodian mission, the good old Patreon account. So please, whether it's $1, it makes a difference. Whether it's $10, which translates as Saint Life, it makes a difference. Whether it's $100, if you could help support fixing the church in Sihanoukville, we got to rebuild the wall the government tore down. Please support the Church of Cambodia. If this has blessed you, like, share, subscribe to this channel, pray for the mission in Cambodia, support financially the mission in Cambodia, and that would be very much appreciated. And so we got some comments and questions, which we'll go over. And here we go. We have Voice of Reason's whole shtick was, look at all the problems in Eastern Orthodoxy. Ubie's rebuttal was, the first century church had the same issues as the first millennium church, to which Voice of Reason responded, well, the Catholics don't mock keys. So there we go. That's George. We have, I agree the Voice of Reason was very simple, but it was true that Eastern Orthodoxy is extremely divided. It doesn't seem like a Catholic church. And again, you would not get along with the first millennium church. We have Craig has a line a while ago that really stuck with me. Orthodoxy is in the details. Go deeper than surface level stuff and papism crumbles. Thank you, Fo. Absolutely. We have St. Vincent's canon establishes what existed before the modern papal claims. Yeah, it's like we literally have a book which uses the term consentient, right? Like it's not like I invented consensus-based ecclesiology and epistemology. Like there's a literal word, consentient, for it. So there you go. Read St. Vincent de Lérins. It's funny. It has none of the epistemological or ecclesiological views of modern papism, which you think someone writing in France would in those days. And it's not that he doesn't talk about the papacy. Now we have the Eastern Catholics dogmatically celebrate that Mary died. Contradiction equals false position. Eastern Catholics refute Rome. Do you pray to St. Palma? So we have that point. He's a great debater. No one is denying that. You could say replacing Ford V8s with a new terrible 3-cylinder hybrids. All right, that's an opinion there. People apologists sell you this used car pitch. Well, the Pope just solves everything. Amazing. Isn't that great? But it's not actually real, right? He doesn't solve things, as we discussed. It doesn't actually work like the used car. We have loud, boisterous, confident, assertive, and performatively triumphant equals winning and true to the crowd. And sadly, that's true. And like, you know, Ubie's voice is never going to be like Voice of Reason's voice. It's just a fact. And so like, if someone's going to pull that card, you're going to have to pull out another card and it might not get nice. And I wouldn't want to be part of that debate personally. We have, it was surrounded by cheering Catholics and it was going to stop that. And there you go. So venue, it's like, again, playing in the Loud House, the Syracuse Orange play versus another stadium. That could affect things. Can you expand a little bit more about purgatory? What is the Orthodox stance on it? And in short, when you die of sins that you repented of, but your repentance hasn't, like, let's say, become reflexive for you yet, like you're still struggling with what you're repenting with, or you feel bad about it, but haven't really changed yet, that is an incomplete level of sanctification, which through the prayers of the church and liturgy celebrated in your honor, the grace of God will purify you of over time until you do go to heaven. And this gets in, we have a whole episode on hell, which is really well received on this channel. So you might want more detail there. It explains how that works. So the Orthodox view is like purgatory, but without all the medieval stuff, which, by the way, Roman Catholics only changed after Vatican II. So yeah, you're backing your way into the Orthodox view. That's great, but you still have indulgences. And so the Roman Catholic view of purgatory is deficient because it has a whole fake thing of indulgences, which is dogmatic for the Roman Catholics. We're going to get into some more in a bit, but I'm going to do something I always wanted to do, an encore, right? You didn't think you're getting an encore. We're not done yet. We're not done yet, audience. Cathodox said stuff, and we're going to give a response to Cathodox, right? So you got more than you bargained for in this video. All right. Now, Cathodox claimed that Ubie lied. Like, I think it was in real big letters in the thumbnail, if I remember right. And lie has become a synonym for conclusion I disagree with. And we got to stop calling people liars simply because we disagree with them. We need to invent a new word, right? Like, there's lie and there's something that's really a lie, right? Like you can't call when you disagree with someone a liar all the time. Sometimes they're not lying. Sometimes they're just wrong, or they're stupid, or they are naive. There's all sorts of different things than lying. So we have this. Looks like we're going to have to do some extra donations to Cambodia. Donation encore. Yes. Already donated. Donate again. And give a donation. Here, I want to do something fun here. And I'm serious. In your donation, if you put in the memo line, voice of reason, we will pray in Cambodia and we will pray in Cambodia for voice of reason. We can't do it liturgically because that's against the canonical practice, but we could pray for voice of reason in Cambodia. So there you go. Donate, pray for voice of reason, first conversion to Orthodoxy, and we will do that in Cambodia. So there you go. So anyway, he made some good points, Cathodox, like the idea of blessed Acacius, the Acacian schism. And I agree with Cathodox. It's kind of odd that we call him blessed. And people do this like with Theodoret. They'll be like, blessed Theodoret. I'm not a fan of that stuff. Like, just call him Acacius. Just call him Theodoret. It is worth pointing out that Acacius was on the diptychs and venerated by saints, like saints we canonize. So saints considered Acacius a saint. And so it doesn't make Ubie bad. It's just kind of anachronistic. I think it's kind of settled that Acacius really shouldn't have the title blessed, but you could take that up with also the people who say blessed Theodoric. So I'm not a fan of that either. Now, Cathodox claim that Gelasius is an Orthodox saint. He absolutely is not. He's not. Pope Gelasius is not an Orthodox in Ixaria. You could find really bad Western Rite websites that just simply take Roman martyrology and stuff and take Roman saints and then claim they're our saints, but he's not in any synodical document that accepts him as a saint. So Gelasius is not our saint. All right. So some people know. I've made some of these errors in the past, like with Pope Hermistus and stuff. And then now I don't trust anything on the internet. I'd go right to the Synaxaria if I want the answer. Now, he talks about St. Irenaeus and Rome's preeminent authority in the Cathodox response video. And grammatically, the papal reading is possible. It's not like a wrong reading. In fact, what was I reading from another? It was from a pope, might have been Damasus, but it was, I think, a 5th century pope, where it actually uses the same exact Latin words, and they're using it in the sense that Cathodox interprets it. So it's not a, it's not like you can't interpret it that way. But grammatically, the political reading, i.e. princely authority, is more likely. I think it's more compelling. And it could also be, like, literally the word prince is there in preeminent authority if you look at the Latin. Context favors the latter because Rome is a microcosm of the doctrine being brought in by the world's Christians. You might not see this in the New Advent translation, but in fuller translations of the passage, this is clear. So let's get into this. This is a quotation from Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 1, page 461. A lot of people haven't read this. The following from a more candid Roman Catholic, which is better and more literal. So this is a Roman Catholic translation of the same passage. For to this church, on account of more potent principality, it is necessary that every church, that is, those who are on every side faithful, resort, in which church ever, by those who are on every side, has been preserved that tradition which is from the apostles. Here, it is obvious, this is what the translator writes in his footnotes, that the faith was kept at Rome by those who resort there from all quarters. She was a mirror of the Catholic world, owing here orthodoxy to them, not the sun dispensing her own light to others, but the glass bringing their rays into a focus. So my point is, you don't have to agree with the Ante-Nicene Father collection. I'm just saying intelligent people have read that Latin. There's Roman Catholic translations that concur with it, and they interpret the passage politically. That Rome is the political capital, all the world's Christians go there, and therefore we know that that's what the Orthodox doctrine is. That it's not about Rome's authority as a some sort of religious authority as a synod. So that being said, he talks about Pope Eugene and the Eighth Ecumenical Council because it came up with Ubie. And Cathodox is correct that Eugene recognized Constable 869 as the Ecumenical Council. But I want to bring something up. Why not the other papal councils, right? The papal ratification was understood to be the proof of ecumenicity. Why not Lyon? Why not Fourth Lateran? Why not all these other councils? And so it shows you they did not have this Vatican I understanding of what makes an ecumenical council yet. And it's worth pointing out in the papally printed editions of Florence, because no one printed these books without the Pope approving it, it called Florence the Eighth Ecumenical Council. So Cathodox is not fully wrong and not fully right, and Ubie's not fully wrong and not fully right. So how about that? Did Rome accept Constable 869? Now, the evidence for recognition by Adrian II and John VIII, whether ecumenical or not, is at best dubious. So you get all these quotations from Cathodox, but we leave this out from Price and Montanaro on page 49. And so they claim it's dubious. I just want to point out medieval canon law included both kind of Constantinople force. So in a sense, they were both ecumenical. So my opinion is that John VIII, this is the Vornik's opinion, did cancel 869 for reasons that he says. This is John VIII, that Adrian II didn't accept it. And Adrian II didn't accept it because of disputes over Bulgaria that weren't settled by that council. Rome actually ended up getting, we see this in letter 295 of Pope John VIII, ended up getting jurisdiction over Bulgaria after 879, right? So that's why they accepted that council, because they got the jurisdiction they wanted, and that's why they didn't accept 869, because they didn't get the jurisdiction they wanted. But when those memories started to fade, and they just had both conciliar documents, they just received both into canon law. That's why they're both in Gracian. So again, more of a nuanced issue, which is covered in detail in the discussion I had in Orthodox Ethos on Constantinople 879, 880. Now, there's a discussion of excommunication of Pope Vigilius, and the textual proof is covered at length in my response to Most Holy Family Monastery. So I'm not going to give a ton of detail here, but I just want to point out that Pope Vigilius was imperially deposed by loss of his titles. I mean, though his titles are gone from the minutes of the council. So clearly he's moved the diptychs. He's no longer Pope. That's what the council was doing by accepting the imperial deposition. And the matter was pending Rome electing a new pope, which they wanted because they wanted a pope that received the council. And this is how Vigilius even became pope after Silverius, right? An imperial deposition is Silverius, and Vigilius was then consecrated when Silverius is still alive. So that's what they were potentially going to do, but then Vigilius recanted, and they didn't have to. So it's not a full excommunication, which is why the council explicitly stated the communion was maintained with Rome itself, right? They wanted to keep Vigilius on ice. He's not a bishop anymore. Once they find the next guy, they could replace him. But if they could still exact some pressure and before that occurs, get what they want, they were willing to do that. So that's what occurred there. And if you want more details, I cover that in my video in response to Most Holy Family Monastery. Orthodox claims that Vigilius and Honorius aren't heretics. And here are the facts. One approved heretical books. No doubt that Vigilius did that. He did it in a decree, by the way. And another taught. That's said in the 6th session of the 7th Ecumenical Council. The word taught is used. And disseminated, which is another word for sending out the doctrine. So that's like teaching, right? Like if you disseminate information to people. And that's talked about in the decree of the 6th Council, heresies, right? So Honorius taught and disseminated heresies. This is something the 6th Council says in its decree. And so, yeah, you could get to meaningless distinctions. It wasn't taught, it was just permitted, or it was a material heresy, not a formal heresy, or whatever. You can make endless distinctions. But the point is, what they did was heretical. And Honorius was condemned as a heretic by popes into the 11th century. And so they didn't invent yet the sort of distinctions that were necessary in order to make Honorius not a heretic, because he taught and disseminated heresy. And so this kind of comes like, well, I could find this one document from Pope Leo II that uses this different word, but didn't Pope Leo II accept the 6th Council? And he didn't say, I took issue with how the 6th Council explained things. He just explained stuff in his own words instead of mimicking exactly the terminology that was in the decree of the 6th Council. So it's kind of like this ad hoc argument that all that matters what Pope Leo II said, and we must know for a fact he used a slightly different word because he was repudiating, we guess, what was in the decree of the 6th Council, which is, again, special pleading, obvious special pleading. Orthodox rightly corrects Ubie and Roman Catholics about Roman Catholics in North Korea and Antarctica. There's like, I think, a actual Roman Catholic bishop of North Korea. As we already covered, facts about Malaysius and Rome. And so there you go. That's the encore. We're going to do some audience questions, and then we'll call it a day. We have John Calarafi. Acacius was complicit with Miaphysite heretics, which was why Rome demanded his condemnation in the first place, which is true. But we do have saints that accepted the Henoticon, right? We have, I think, Flavian II, and who's the saint in Constantinople for St. John II? I forget his name. But the point is, we have saints that Rome also venerates that accepted the Henoticon. So it's, at the end of the day, we have guys like Acacius that are actually saints. So there you go. We have, I'll make a channel called Ortholic on second thought. There you go. What do you think of the two calendars? I'm Orthodox, but it's hard for me to accept this. What can the left hand celebrate on one day and the right hand on the other? The calendar issue is a real problem. We obviously, in the early church, had sometimes even different dates for Pascha, for periods of time, differing calendars. But this is something aberrant and it's bad. And there should just be one calendar. And the only right way to change a calendar is with the acceptance of all the synods. We have certain patristic documents, conciliar documents, that don't allow for the Manian to be changed and call it a heresy. And so it's bad that we have synods doing it. And we need to pray for these canonical issues to be resolved. So that's my view. Lie implies conscious error in order to deceive. Yep, it's a problem, right? So we can't call everyone a liar because we disagree with them. What do you think of Dr. Sujawadi's Trinitarianism? And I don't know anything about it, so I have no opinion. No opinion on that. 1672 clearly outlines our belief of Hades and repentance, though it's worth pointing out that even Dositheus himself made a kind of like corrective in 1690 to make it clear what he wasn't meaning was purgatory. And so that's just an interesting thing. Like, again, it's not medieval purgatory, but it is consistent with what St. Mark of Ephesus teaches about the doctrine in comparing it to purgatory. So that's another thing like that people don't talk about. It's like, oh, look, Dositheus accepts purgatory, don't you? And it's like, wait, no, Dositheus says exactly what St. Mark of Ephesus says. And in the preliminary debates before the Council of Florence, St. Mark of Ephesus used that Dosithian doctrine before Dositheus existed and contrasted that with purgatory. So they're not the same thing. It's just too surface level to call them the same thing. Do you think the Photian controversy is the linchpin argument that nails it for orthodoxy? I don't know. It's honestly, even before it's Orthodox, just the whole history of the early church is Orthodox. I just don't know how you avoid that, honestly. If you want, I guess, a smoking gun, the smoking gun would be the Photian controversy because a deal was struck and Rome broke the deal. And so, one, usually deal breakers are the wrong side. You don't have to get all esoteric about that. And two, the fact that Rome thought they could make a deal and that it could be honored kind of implies that if you don't think that deal was worth the paper it was written on, then that means your whole ecclesiology changed in the meantime. So that's an issue. But there are certain mean things about 879 that exist too that need to be corrected. Like, I don't think Photius, like one day I might have to do a show called Photius, the First Ecumenist. Photius really was not harsh enough on the West, and I think that actually eventually permitted the issues that happened in ecclesiology. So he won the battle, but he lost the war for the Western mind. And maybe he couldn't win the war for the Western mind. So, like, sometimes you'll take the Pyrrhic victory. But it was 879 ended up proving to be a Pyrrhic victory for the West, because we ended up losing the West, which is a tragedy. We don't want to lose. The fracture of the church is always a tragedy. It's not a good thing. Even Orthodoxy is the fullness of the truth. We don't have the canonical fullness. And what I mean by that specifically, so people don't chop up my words, is like we have canons on Rome, where Rome belongs, but we don't have a Patriarch of Rome. We got a Romanian bishop in Rome, but we don't have a Patriarch of Rome in a Roman synod. And so, just like they don't have us. And so there is a deficiency there, even if we have the fullness of salvation, because we are the church. It's like a family where the husband walks out. There's still the wife and the children. The family's still a family, but they're hurt. And so, yeah, the church has been hurt for 1,000 years. That's for sure. Craig, what do you think about people that say the church developed in the first 4 centuries? Wouldn't that open the door for papacy evolving the second millennium? They would need details, and they would have to justify those details. Like when people say Trinitarianism developed, it's just not true. We literally have like Saint Justin Martyr, Saint Athenagoras. We have like saints literally saying one divine essence, 3 persons. It's in the 2nd century Apologist. We have in Saint Dionysius, who is been proven to be authentic. So like these aren't anachronisms. So like that doesn't work. Then in Rise and Fall of the Papacy, we cover how synods and bishops actually existed in Judaism. So like that doesn't work. That didn't evolve. And so like you would need someone to actually prove that something changed. And I think really the best argument they can make is, well, baptism, was it for infants or was it for believers? And that's a stronger argument than people will admit. That's a way stronger argument people admit, because there was a time where the believer's baptism was the more popular baptism. Now it's for different reasons than what we have today. And that's where if I were to debate this with a Baptist, that would be an actual good debate, because an informed Baptist could actually at least make a respectable argument. I don't think Roman Catholics can make a honestly respectable argument for the first millennium. That's why they have to get into all these ad hocs and invented second millennium epistemologies and distinctions that didn't exist in the first millennium. But you don't have to do that with a lot of the Baptist stuff with baptism in the first 4 centuries. That would be a very interesting debate to have. In fact, if someone wants to debate me on it, I'll purposely debate the wrong side just so people could see how strongly it could be defended. But that being said, I just don't think it's really provable that the church evolved in the first 4 centuries. If you get into any sort of details, Orthodoxy is in the details. Why aren't Eastern Catholics Eastern Orthodox? And again, it's a kind of ethnic schism. Same reason why Oriental Orthodox aren't Orthodox. You get to the history, it's always this ethnic strife. And so you would have to get to each ethnicity for the details, but it's always ethnic strife. I think Ubie lost the debate the moment he opened his rebuttal to saying that was pathetic. That was truly awful. That being said, Ubie's arguments were better. And yes, like someone might just say that sounded too mean. And that's why I wouldn't want to debate voice of reason, because I don't know. I wouldn't have said that, but I would have been very matter of fact about how what he's doing is incorrect and indefensible and naive. And then people say that's uncharitable. But how else could he respond to like a secret bishop told me? Like, it's just, you almost have to respond to sarcasm because it's just really bad. And so it's, I don't know. I just don't see, we say combined to the low intelligence comment, honestly. Well, you said it. So I don't know what to say, Dub. I was quoting you. Maybe you're being disingenuous, I suppose. Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully. Now we have, let's see. If size is a factor, then Islam is right because they have more people, and you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. We have, how would you refute Roman Catholics saying the Orthodox Church is small and therefore it should be false? And I would just say it's an argument that doesn't work if it wasn't true in the year 1300, right? If the Orthodox population outnumbered the Latin population in 1300 and 1200, anytime after the schism, then it can't be a true argument. How does truth change over time? So it's true now, but it wasn't always true. Demographers won't grant that the Latin West had a higher population when the schism occurred. So the bigger question is a spiritual one. Why would God providentially allow the heresies to outnumber the truth? But if you think about it, it's unbelievers for the history of Christianity have outnumbered Christians. And I'd say in the church itself, the damned outnumber the saved. So these proportions always exist. And if you want my real opinion, it's a punishment for our sin. And I think the more sin, the more schisms and more problems. And that's my opinion. And people say Arianism was huge in the 300s, but I do want to say that's somewhat of a meme a little bit. It wasn't as big as people think. A lot of like flim-flam bishops went along with it in the East. A lot of people would not show up. So like, for example, yes, we got councils of 300 people, but there were 4,000 bishops on earth. So a lot of it's hyperbolic that most of the church was Arian, if you want my real opinion. Great stream. Thank you for the free knowledge. And that's really the reason why I do this, is so people walk away knowing more than where they started. And I think with the debate, I think with a lot of stuff, Dr. Gavin Ortlund has done in Orthodoxy, they walk away with less knowledge. And I'd prefer something where even if you disagree with me, you learn something from it. Even in this one, there's a lot of moralisms. We shouldn't conduct debates this way. We shouldn't conduct apologetics this way. Give me a good apologetic that I disagree with, but good in its form, and I won't talk about all the moral stuff. But how do you not bring up the moral stuff when there's all these morally defective arguments? So there you go. We have this. VOR's arguments weren't good, especially the anonymous things about alleged bishops and priests. I will say this. The moment you bring up, I know a birdie in a tree that told me, I think you automatically lost. Doesn't matter how much a fool the other person made. And if it slipped out of your mouth, I go, you know what? That's a really dumb argument. I'm sorry. Forget that I said it. And just leave it at that. I think that's an automatic loss, if you want my real opinion. We have this. The ethnic division of Orthodox, the point the Catholics make is a bit hypocritical when you consider they're conquering and Latinizing the world more of an ethnic conquering than a religious one. And for Protestants, it's a cultural, right? It's a socio-economic sort of conquering. But again, Christ is preached. That's what's important, right? It's through all these different means that Christ is preached. I learned that I have low intelligence because I think Ubie got dominant. Now, Dub, I want to be nice, so leave the comment quickly because we're going to end soon. And how old are you? So answer how old are you are, and what is your education in, into what range? So you might not be dumb when it comes to science. You might not be dumb for a 16-year-old. You know, I'm 40, right? So like I've just learned more on this earth in that time. So it's all relative. But yeah, like if you're an adult and you actually seriously think Voice of Reason won because he talked about secret bishops, there's something wrong there. It might not even be intelligence. It might honestly be something spiritual. You should pray about it. There's maybe a spiritual blindness. Older than you, college, maybe too old. Maybe you're getting, Biden's older than me. College grad. What's your degree in? All right. So again, if it's not in history, maybe you don't have the discipline, the right discipline to understand it. Craig is 40. Yeah, I'm an old fart. And honestly, I'm forgetting stuff now. I'll be honest. Like I know, like all the boomers don't think they've lost a step. I've lost a step. I lose a step every decade, and I see it. And I'm reaching a point where I think I'm losing more than I'm gaining, which is problematic. But that's all in God's hands. All in God's hand. You look like you're in your 20s. Well, thank you. I'm at the point where I'm grateful for that. No, I'm not a Zoomer. I'm an old guy. I grew up watching Married with Children. I remember Simpsons. Well, they're new now too. I remember when they were good and new. How about that? Yeah, business. Yeah, you might be a better businessman than me. It's a different discipline. If you understand historical methodology, if you even understand philosophy, like what makes a good dialectic, voice of reason's arguments wouldn't work. And this is where like someone may be in good faith, like Dub here, because he's in good faith answering the questions, could be deceived because they don't have the rhetorical and the educational background to understand what they're dealing with. And this is when we just got to leave it to God, in my opinion. Right, Dub? It's great. You thought he won. Fine. You're entitled to your opinion, right? We might not be in a free country anymore, but you are entitled to your opinion. You're free in your own mind, and that's great. And all I could say is pray about it and reflect about it. The fact you're on the stream means I think that, you're open to hearing something different. And just think about the points I made and then consider, is Craig's premises correct? The premise meaning a debate must have certain kinds of arguments that are open to consideration and that secret bishop arguments are wrong and things like that. And if you work through that, you might find, by those specific standards, voice of reason lost. And then you might go, well, then what standards am I using as Dub that voice of reason won? And then you might start realizing, all right, I guess it was the voice. I guess Ubie was. I didn't like when Ubie said that. I thought it was disrespectful. I guess I discounted that. I guess I didn't read that about the Malaysian schism. I didn't know. And then you might actually start finding where you land, I suppose, like a self-diagnostic. And maybe like St. Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 13. Examine yourself to see if you're in the faith, right? We should be doing self-examination. It's a very Jewish thing. I could see that why St. Paul wrote that. Because I've noticed most Goyim don't self-examine. It's like maybe it's just a Jewish thing that they constantly self-examine and tear into their own guts, metaphorically. But I think it spiritually does much good to self-examine, right? Self-examine what's your methodology. When you read a historical book, what do you expect from the methodology? How should sources be approached? And I think that's very important. There needs to be some self-examination. So thank you for answering those questions. And Dub says, does the Bible give an example of an infant baptism? And it doesn't. The scriptures speak of household baptisms. All right. And you could say there's infants in households, but that's just that's an argument from silence, an inference from silence. That doesn't say. Could be, could not be. And so infants weren't in the baptism of Moses. And right, there's one passage that speaks of circumcision in a way that equates it to baptism in the scriptures. And again, I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just letting you know, right? But there's obvious differences with circumcision and baptism as well. Circumcision is just for boys. Baptism's for everyone. Circumcision was delayed 8 days. Baptism has been historically delayed 40 days. Circumcision doesn't have chrismation. Baptism has always historically been coupled with chrismation. Right. And that's another thing that doesn't come up here is where look at the fact that the Roman Catholics don't commune infants, which was a universal passage of the first millennium. They couldn't settle that. That settled for us. They couldn't settle who they commune. And they baptize people. Then they commune them. And then only years later, give them the seal of the Holy Spirit. How did that happen? That was unheard of in the first millennium. And yet that's unsettled where like you have Roman Catholic popes in the 20th century trying to reel that back a little bit. And so there's some real big issues there, I feel. We have, chivalry bothers nowhere in the Bible that says infant was baptized, but many acts of the apostolic households being baptized, which presumably included infant children. What do you think about Orthodox hierarchs who want union with Rome? I think that they're over-educated beyond really, if you want my real opinion, a lot of people have degrees, but they don't properly understand what they've learned. If you want my real opinion. because people, knowledge puffs up, the scriptures say. And just because you have a degree doesn't make you smart. I know PhDs that say, I know PhDs that are legitimately stupid. Now it doesn't mean all PhDs are stupid either. That'd also be fallacious, obviously. I just think a lot of hierarchs start uncritically buying to these Roman categorizations of thought and Roman and Protestant education systems, and they have the wrong context to evaluate a lot of these things. That's my opinion. Also, not for nothing, to become a notable bishop generally requires a lot of political acumen. And this is something Plato knew in the Republic. The person that should guide the ship is the one looking at the stars, not the people fighting for the rudder. But who becomes the people guiding the ship? The people fighting for the rudder. Who usually becomes the bishop? People fighting to be bishop. So they have good political acumen, but they're not necessarily the best theological thinkers. And you start seeing this when you read enough. It's the same the first millennium, because we're the same broken model since Adam and Eve. And so in the first millennium, the amount of people that really understand theology and all these controversies is very small. It's usually a few saints, and then everyone else goes along with them. That kind of huge amount in the middle. There's some heretics, and there's some saints, and everyone in the middle. And the Spirit leads the people in the middle one way or the other, or permits them the other. Spirit never brings someone to heresy, literally. The permissive will of God is what I'm speaking of. And so I would say, yeah, it would seem you must be a heretic yourself to want to unite with the heresy, in my real opinion. Having a scholarship doesn't automatically make someone smart, and also doesn't automatically make someone stupid, right? Let's see. We have, do you think that voting height is enough to completely refute Rome? No, because at the end of the day, I think, I think the issue of Roman Catholicism is ultimately spiritual. And I don't think you can fully read yourself out of it. I think you need to follow a prayer rule that has prayers from the first millennium. I think you need to fast Wednesday and Fridays. I think you need scripture readings every day. And you need to read pre-schism saints. And wait for your heart to take you where it belongs. I think that's more important. I do think, though, in apologetics, it's one of the most indefensible sides for Roman Catholics. Because they don't have any good responses. It's just simply, all they could say is they only have a philosophical response. You need a pope, and all that matters is what a pope says. And that's just not compelling to the people that already decided that all that matters is a pope. And so that's pretty much it. So guys, if you got more questions, please leave comments. I really hope this show has blessed you and helped you. And again, Orthodox Christian, where do I put my hands? I don't know. I can't do it. There you go. There. OrthodoxChristianTheology.com/donate. This has blessed you. All links below. Great stream. Thank you so much, guys. It's great to have you here. And Voice of Reason, I'm sorry. Authentically, really sorry for any hurt feelings. I said I'm up for a private conversation. I don't want anything from you. Just one man to another. And like I said, I'll take you out to dinner. Man to man, just have a nice little chat. It's fine. I'm fine with making friends. Again, this is what I like, is theology. You don't have to agree with me. So that's the thing, and again, thanks for doing the stream, answering our questions. So I will end this show as I end all of them by quoting Jesus' rock: fight to the death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.